Hmm. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammang sanghang namasami. Dear friends, this is the third Dhamma talk or Dhamma discussion of this retreat about the nutriments of existence. And we're speaking about the second of the four nutriments, namely contact. So contact in Pāli is called phassa. Phassa. Literally, it means touch. In this context, it's not only the touching of the body with something, but it's also the touching through all the five senses as the doors, with the mind touching its object. So there's this coming together of an object, a sense faculty, and the related kind of consciousness. Here in Majjhima 38, the Buddha said that consciousness is reckoned according to the specific conditions dependent upon which it arises. Consciousness that arises dependent on the eye and sights is reckoned as eye consciousness. Consciousness that arises dependent on the ear and sounds is reckoned as ear consciousness. Consciousness that arises depending on the nose and smells is reckoned as nose consciousness. Consciousness that arises dependent on the tongue and taste is reckoned as tongue consciousness. Consciousness that arises dependent on the body and touches is reckoned as body consciousness. And consciousness that arises dependent on the mind and thoughts is reckoned as mind consciousness. It's like fire, which is reckoned according to the specific conditions depending on which it burns. A fire that burns dependent on logs is reckoned as a log fire. A fire that burns dependent on twigs is reckoned as a twig fire. A fire that burns dependent on grass is reckoned as a grass fire. A fire that burns dependent on cow dung is reckoned as cow dung fire. A fire that burns dependent on husks is reckoned as a husk fire. A fire that burns dependent on rubbish is reckoned as a rubbish fire. Another great sutta that's so relevant to the intensity the potential distress associated with touch is the Adita Pariyaya Sutta, the fire sermon. The Buddha said the eye is on fire. And with what is the eye on fire? It's on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. The visual objects are on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. The eye consciousness is on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. And likewise, for all the sense faculties and the faculties of the mind, all on fire, burning. This sutta was given to a group of recluses, religious experts who had been practicing for a long time, with including the veneration of the fire. So those Brahmins would keep a sacred flame burning in their home, and would make a very special effort to make sure that the sacred flame on the hearth in the house never went out, to keep it nourished with fuel and to keep it going, and to make that a focal point for their religious ceremonies. And so then the Buddha took their previous religious tradition, worship tradition, and in a way radically turned it upside down by pointing out how fire can be such a catastrophe, such a disaster. And so it is for us living in a consumer society. We constantly are, we keep the fire of, I hate to say this, we keep the fire of the internet constantly burning like the sacred flame. And when you see people who are addicted to their phones, and you see them, all the time when you ride the bus or walk on the sidewalk or something, you used to see people would be just like experiencing what it's like to be in the town or in the city walking down the sidewalk, or what it's like to be on the bus, or what it's like to be on the train. And now everybody is in their little world worshiping this little candle, being isolated from one another, being kind of like sucked in, and the mind is pulled in and attached. And so that's just kind of like a visual example, but there are so many different ways that the mind can become stuck in on those contact of the senses. In the what we recited a little bit ago, just before this, we said that we wear the clothing and we have the lodging for protection from Dhamma Samakasavata, tapasiring sapasampasano patigathaya. That's a kind of it's an onomatopoeia because it sounds like what it is. The Dhamma Samakasavata tapasiring, that's the touching. That's the insects and the mosquitoes and the creepy crawling things and the sunburn and the wind and the itching and distracting quality of all of the touches that one could encounter when one is outside, if one is exposed to the elements without any protection. There is a very direct connection given in the suttas between the touching and setting off the fire of craving, which perpetuates the cycle of rebirth. It says independent origination, pasa pachaya vedana. So that depending on touch, there is feeling. And the feeling are the three kinds of feelings. What is pleasant, painful, or neutral? When the corresponding feeling arises, this has the potential to set off all of the other mental functions that occur independent on contact. So perception is dependent on contact. And then the feeling has a very strong impact on the quality or the color of the perception that dominates the mind. So if there's something that's strongly dangerous to our existence, the perception can come up so powerful and forceful. It's like our whole person has become strongly focused on and fascinated by that dangerous object, as if you encountered a rattlesnake in the wilderness, and you would be focused on it because you want to be able to jump out of the way before it strikes. And so the same way, if someone is providing a threat, or if they're providing insult or blame, or if they're offering to take away something that you think belongs to you, in those cases, that then the mind would become very, very focused on that, and the perception would be about how bad, how dangerous, how unpleasant that person is. But if we get the perception of something that would be good for us, if we, you think it's food, and then it's a little softer kind of arousal, but it's a definite arousal towards that food. Seeing how nice it is, how lovely it is, how beautiful it is, how tasty it is, how it's got a savor to it, it's got a spicy flavor or a salty flavor or a sweet flavor, or if it's some other kind of nourishment, if it could be you have a chance to hear a storyteller telling a story, and you could notice how lovely the voice is, how clever the words are, how interesting the rhymes are, how there's different levels of meaning in the story, how the story is being well told. And so as long as you see those pleasant, nice qualities, then you continue to be drawn in and established with that beautiful thing, or that in that case, that interesting, fascinating story of something which is satisfying the senses. It's feeding the senses every bit as much as some nutritious food is feeding the body. Independent origination, dependent on feeling, is craving. dependent on craving is clinging. So the craving is called tanha, which literally means thirst. And what's called clinging is upadana, which in this context, in the context of nutriment, there's two meanings of upadana. One is just that grasping. And a second meaning of upadana is fuel. So when something is upadana, it's literally the fuel for supporting our continued existence. And when the fire is burning, the fire is taking up the fuel, it's absorbing the fuel. And so when we are clinging to an object, whether it be, in this case, an unpleasant object like a danger, or a pleasant object like an entertaining story, we're taking it in, we're absorbing it. It's like just like if a plant is planted in the ground, it's rooted into the ground, and then it's absorbing the nutriments up through the soil. And so just that way, our awareness has become planted on that experience and rooted into that experience, and it's pulling up the nutriment out of that experience for our continued existence. And all of this is starting from contact. When we have our consciousness planted in that way and taking up the nutriments for continued existence, then dependent on that arises bhava, our existence. A whole world springs up to us. So where we are now, we are existing in this world of the sense desire. That's the human world, the one that we occupy together with all of the animals and some of the invisible spiritual beings, which are still planted and connected into this world associated with sense desire. Or we could become rooted and planted into a different realm of existence. We could become planted in heaven. And even while we're still a human being living our life as a human being, if we do a lot of the divine heavenly practices that are orientated towards heaven, like if we really our lives are very saturated with the practice of the divine abidings of loving kindness, sympathetic compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, and we practice those continuously, it would be almost sort of like our world becomes kind of like a heavenly world. Even right now, even though we're still in this world of sense desire, but because of our practices and how the mind is planted and how the mind is taking up the nourishment of the divine abidings, we experience it as being almost heaven. And if we stay there, then there's the chance that at the end of this lifespan, that one could be reborn in an actual heavenly existence, or one could be practicing the immaterial meditations, contemplating the boundless space, boundless consciousness, contemplating nothingness, and so forth, doing practices where within that meditation, actually the sensitivity to the 5 physical senses is pretty thoroughly cut off. And so one is ignoring or suppressing the touching with the 5 physical senses, so that the only touch left is something mental. And in that case, even though we're still alive, still a human, still in this realm of sense desire, while we're doing that kind of meditation, it's almost like we have left this realm of existence, and it's like almost in the immaterial realm. And if this practice is what we do a lot, and it becomes our constant practice, then it would be possible that at the end of this lifespan, one could be reborn into that realm and stay there for a long time. So I know others might have this question. I know when I was a beginner in Buddhism, I very often ask myself, well, craving and clinging, what's the difference between craving and clinging? When you don't have it, you crave it. And then when you get it, you cling to it. But this additional or this secondary meaning of upadana as taking up and absorbing, the same way that a fire is taking up the fuel and using up the fuel and sustaining its continued existence by means of being fed the fuel. I think that gives a really very clear idea about that part of it. It is interesting, though, even though the Buddha so clearly pointed out the danger in contact, and almost like the world being on fire, giving like it's a catastrophe. And yet he advised to practice Vedana-nupassana, the mindful awareness of feeling. That's one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And in the other teachings about the 6 sense bases, he guided to meditate in sensitivity of noticing and paying attention and directing the mind to being aware of that moment of contact and the feeling that arises from that. So if contact is such a catastrophe, why is the Buddha advising us to direct our practice towards that? My answer to that question is actually, to the extent that contact, feeling, and everything which is fueled from feeling truly is a catastrophe and a disaster, we will not solve it unless we're able to look at it steadily, clearly, with wisdom and deep awareness, looking into it. If we want to not examine contact, feeling, and everything that arises from that, if we had the ability to do that kind of immaterial meditation where one has cut off the senses and just gone into a place where it's as if the five senses are anesthetized and one is just in the mind area. If you do that without having a chance to look deeply and see with wisdom, then that actually could support making the meditation into a kind of a psychological bypass where you are not dealing with painful things. We even sometimes see this. I once I met a gentleman. He was actually, he was a prisoner in jail, and when he had been a child, his father used to regularly beat his mother, and he would be up in his room, and he taught himself how to meditate as a helpless small child. He would lock the door to his bedroom and cover his ears, and he was able to disappear from that home and to block out the sound of the beating. And so what he had learned about in meditation for like psychological protection from something that as a small child was too much for him to bear, too much to hold, with the small perspective of a small child. And he learned how to just disappear and go away from that in order to not experience it. And that talent actually became an impediment later on, because having that ability to go into to remove himself from reality in that way, that he had to then overcome it in order to learn how to face reality with the wisdom and strength of a strong, full-grown man who has developed a certain amount of virtue and wisdom. So then the Buddha is teaching us to practice Vedana for the purpose of being able to, with our adult strength and wisdom, to look at the catastrophe and to see it for what it is. And then furthermore, to the extent that this fire is being perpetuated by the unskillful choices that one could make, and where there's the possibility to take a more skillful choice by reframing one's perspective on what we experience and what we touch, so that instead of perceiving something as being just a danger to my existence, or instead of only perceiving it as being, oh, this is going to be good for my existence, you have a much a wider possibility of how to see these, what we're experiencing. It can be seen as impermanent. And so a great research or study that you can do about the Vedana, or the feeling, or a study that you can do about contact, is look and see, is it substantial or not? And it doesn't take a very long investigation to find out how ephemeral and fast changing Vedana can be. But when you find that, it actually could be a really wonderful discovery. So if, for example, you dislike something, and so when that type of object comes into contact with you, because you dislike it, there's that pleasant feeling connected with dislike. And then as a result of your development, your practice, your meditation, your goodwill, your listening to the Dhamma and everything that develops for you, the moment comes when that dislike evaporates and doesn't exist anymore. And one can experience in a strong and brilliant way the fantastic freedom to be able to look at that object without being tortured by dislike. And the same thing for greed. If you are greedy for something and use the training, use what you've learned, understand the power, the ability that you have to make choices, that even you don't have to give in to greed every time it arises. You could just wait and see if it passes. And you may find out that desire didn't really last very long. After just a couple of minutes or a few minutes, actually that desire went away and you don't have the greed anymore. It's gone. And one can experience how some aspects of the like and dislike, or some aspects of the greed and aversion do drop away from our life in a way which is very long-standing. A person could go for many years being addicted to something and some kind of something, and then they could overcome that addiction and possibly go for many years still beset and tortured by desire for that particular activity or that substance that they were addicted to. But it also could be that the desire is lifted, it's gone. It's just not there anymore and not going to come back in this lifetime. If we develop this meditation, the mindfulness of feeling, and in the contemplation about the ayatanas, about the sense faculties, a very acute, sharp, fast way of noticing each moment of contact, then the mind can become so fast and so bright that we can see like the very first arising, which is very, very subtle, which has not yet taken hold, has not yet caused some kind of a formation to develop in the mind. And right at that moment, if we have been developing the contemplation or the insight about impermanence and non-self, and then at that very first touch, the very light touch, it's experienced as being impermanent, it's experienced as being not self, and then the reactions don't arise, and we're able to continue our practice in this open field of equanimity, which is not disturbed by liking and disliking, and experiencing that freedom. So it's for that purpose that the Satipatthana can be cultivated. Even the training, like the Mahasi method of training, in which one is trained to be labeling the moments as accurately as possible and as continuously as possible, and just seeing what's the character of each moment. That's the training that supports becoming disenchanted with contact, no longer seduced by it, certainly no longer craving it. And then with that background based on mindfulness, if one then has the ability to develop sama samadhi, one can experience some period of time within the meditation of being isolated from the contact with the five senses in the four jhana meditation. And in the immaterial meditations, one can further cut back and reduce the contact with certain aspects of mentality. So one can step away from contact and basically, you could say, have a vacation from sensory contact. And doing that should be used not for the sake of doing some kind of a spiritual bypass or psychological bypass, but instead for the purpose of knowledge, that then you know that this world that we live in, our normal world that we live in, the world of sensory contact, that's the kama loka. That is the world that we are in, is the world of sensory contact. But one can discover through meditation that that's not the only world. So then, just with this knowledge that constant bombardment of sensory contact is not inevitable, realizing that there are other things, that then one can then emerge from meditation and be back in the world, experiencing daily life and experiencing sensory contact, but you have a very different kind of a perspective about it, because you know that's not all there is. It's as if there's a certain space or spaciousness around the sensory contacts that one would experience, whether it be in daily life or whether it's in doing the satipatthana meditation focused on sensory contact. The mind has the habit of feeding itself on sensory contact. And it's because of that habit, of that constant feeding, that we suffer. When we realize that we don't have to, then we can strengthen the mind to the point where it doesn't need to feed the attachment to existence or the addiction to existence through continuous sensory contact. So first is the aspect of strengthening our, you could say, discipline or agency, doing our Dhamma push-ups to develop the strength of mind, so that we're not just the victim of the habits of the mind, but we have choices about it. And then with discernment, then we don't want to feed this craving for resistance. So the what's called bhavatanha, there's the three kinds of thirst. There's the thirst for sensual pleasure, and the thirst for resistance, and both of them are fed with contact. But when the wisdom is developed, we won't want it anymore. I think this may be enough. I hope this talk has been meaningful, and I would welcome your questions. Let me just take another glance and see how how are we doing in terms of the program. According to the program, I'm going to let you go at 7 o'clock to have your breakfast or do whatever you need to do. That's 10 minutes from now. But since I have talked so long, I'm willing to stay as long as it takes to answer your questions or to hear your comment or your report. And my question to you is, understanding the second nutriment, the nutriment of contact, what is this teaching good for? What's the point of this practice? What's the benefit that you can gain by cultivating awareness and wisdom about the nutriment of contact? If anybody knows the answer, you may raise your hand. Okay, I have an answer here in the room from Mita Kanti, and then I'll take Sharon. So first, Mita Kanti.
Hello, everyone. Well, I looked at the sutta, so this is kind of the textbook answer, but I think full awakening is the highest result of understanding contact. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Full awakening.
Yes.
It's like the best result.
Yes.
But that is like the textbook answer, and not one based on experience.
Sharanya.
I have a long ways to go to get there, but I'm thinking just being mindful of contact. And like you said, if you can remember that this is impermanent, not self, and possibly unsatisfying, it can help break the chain of reactivity, the habits that stem from that contact. And it opens up a way of kind of loosening, I suppose, the hold of greed and ill will, and also ignorance in the mind. It's the beginning, I suppose, of that unraveling.
Wonderful. Yes, that's exactly what I was trying to tell you. And I hope that most of us have experienced this to some degree, that the unskillful reactivity has become, at least to some degree, lightened and loosened and relieved by means of this contemplation. Damon.
I would like to acknowledge the value of sense impressions being used skillfully to admire beauty in the world and all things that we enjoy. And so I would just summarize my experience of this as simply, don't get too much of a good thing.
Thank you. So the Buddha did not recommend going into a sensory deprivation chamber for the rest of our lives to never have any more contacts. And with the analogy to the food, even a fully enlightened arahant, or even a Buddha, or even a Samma Sambuddha, a perfectly enlightened Buddha who's the knower of the worlds and the teacher of gods and humans, he still has sense contact every day for the duration of his life as a human being living in the world. And so we have to, and even for the, for the continued existence of our life as a human being, for the whatever the lifespan that we have, we need to take the nutriment of contact just the same way we have to take in the nutriment of food for the continued existence of the material body. So actually, if it were even possible to enter a sensory deprivation chamber and stay there for the remainder of our life, it might be a kind of a suicide. That it would I don't know what it would do to our mind, if it would create insanity or death, but we know that people need contact, and even the growth and development of children is dependent on contact. And if children don't receive the right kind of contact when they're in the womb, and when they're born as babies, and when they're young children, they truly have to have the right kind of contact, or else they will be like stunted, and their nervous system and their bodies and their health will not develop in the proper way. And so we're going to have that nourishment. Now, what Damon is suggesting about appreciating the beauty in the world as and using moderation in consuming objects by having contact with them. Yes, that's definitely possible. And I would say that what we experience by contact with nature seems to have a natural relationship to make them one of the safest kind of beautiful objects that one can contemplate. It would be quite natural to be at the beach at sunset and to be so, just awesomely taken up with the colors in the sky and the sound of the waves and the smell and the feel of the wind and everything. But you deep down, this doesn't belong to me. And deep down, you really know that this is just happening at a moment. That even though there will be many sunsets, that this particular moment is just happening one time. And so you know how ephemeral it is. And even the fact that it doesn't belong to you makes it more transcendentally beautiful. And the fact that it's a transient, momentary thing also makes it more beautiful and more uplifting. So then it would be very sick if when experiencing that lovely sunset, the main impulse that you had was, I can afford to have my vacation at the beach together with my family. Let me take a video of this sunset and put it on my Facebook so that all my friends can say, here am I, I'm at the beach, I'm at the beach, I'm at the beach. so that would be, like a perversion of the moment, and not the way to take it in a way which is healing and healthy and helpful. Taking sensory contacts with moderation is just the same way that, as we talked about yesterday, people may choose to cut back or limit or put a boundary around what they take in as far as the food. So the same thing, one can realize that you have choices about what you are choosing to take in as far as sensory contact. I also, in our monk discipline, we're staying away from music and entertainment and shows, but I feel that in some cases that music and art also has the potential for that kind of a transcendental release from the small ego, and for being can be a wholesome kind of a contact. And I don't condemn access to art, which is aiming towards transcending the self, or transcending the ego, transcending, which is not aiming towards increasing sensual desire, but instead it could be used as a kind of like a stepping stone. If someone is experiencing, let's say, agitation and stress or something like some kind of an upset, or if their mind is caught up in some kind of emotional reaction, which is painful and difficult, if you're in the midst of grief or in the midst of anger or the midst of greed, and finding it difficult to like step out of it, listening to, well, for me it would be like Bach or something like that, listening to classical music, which is really transcendental, can be a way of helping to step away from those unwholesome reactivity. And then having stepped away, one can then come back to like a full awareness and mindfulness, which is freed from that reactivity. Okay, Richard. Okay, Maureen, if you were using the technology, you would go to the front of the queue, but when you put your hand up, I see you. Let's hear from Richard and then Maureen.
Thank you. I was just wondering, it's something I noticed myself. Maureen, do you know how to put your hand up in Zoom? Maybe she doesn't know how to do it.
There's something at the bottom of your screen or somewhere on your screen called reactions. And then it gives you, one of the reactions you can give is to raise the hand.
You have to move the mouse. Move your mouse down towards the bottom, and it'll show a line of things. And the, I don't know, third or fourth one. What is it? Or fifth one, maybe.
I see the line, but my glasses and everything, I can't read this tiny writing. Participants chat. share screen, and then there's something. Oh shoot! Record
Record and then reaction.
reactions. I found
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Okay,
Thank
just point at it.
you, Richard.
You'll
Okay.
see raise hand at the bottom of the list.
Oh, there we are.
So now,
Well, why don't we go with Maureen first then?
so now
Okay.
you have, I'm not saying you have to do this because to get up to the keyboard and take care of it. But when you do that, then your little picture on the shared screen jumps ahead.
Well,
Uh,
what do you want me to do?
Now, what would you like to say? Please go ahead.
That solitary confinement is a terrible form of punishment, and it's used in prisons and regimes. And some people seem to, well, it's to break people down. And I think that the mental contacts that we have are important to our understanding the society we live in. I was an at-home mom after being very mentally involved with my education. And I used to read The Guardian daily, every day, to keep me kind of knowing what was happening in the world. And I can see that that's not the only thing you should be doing during your day, but that helped keep me sane. I was less isolated that way. And so we've talked about all the physical contacts, but the contacts with your mind and your memory and all those things. I don't. There's a word I heard somewhere, selfing. I think selfing is when it's creating and strengthening the idea of a self that's permanent, but you still need that contact to be in touch with reality, trying to see things as they really are. So that was my comment anyway. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. It's been very helpful today. I mean,
Good. Thank you so much. I don't have to elaborate on your comment because you are right on. It was even said, I think, during our opening discussion about, and recently about, that contact with humans is one of the most important kind of contact. It's not really, I don't see it in the early text that much developed, how important the interpersonal contact is. We see it elsewhere in the teachings where they acknowledge the crucial significance of hearing the voice of another in establishing one's initial right view, and in the importance of having the Kalyanamitta, or the good friend, as being such the significant, essential part of our spiritual life, that we should not try to have a spiritual life based on being a complete solitary person. And so, but when one reads The Guardian, the contact is coming like through the eye, I guess, and also through the touch and the smell, I guess, because you're touching the newspaper and smelling the newspaper and reading the newspaper, and from that certain ideas are being created in the mind and understood, and that's all part of contact. So taking contact in a balanced and healthy way as one of the nutriments of life, knowing the danger that when there's the identification with it, and feeding the habits of mind, then that's how we should do it. I can tell one more Zen story about the newspaper. It's a Zen story about the teacher he said, just drinking a cup of tea. When drinking a tea, I'm only drinking a cup of tea. and that was what he advised. And then one time the student came along, and I found the teacher was drinking tea and reading the paper. And I said, "Teacher, you told us that when drinking the tea, I'm only drinking the tea." And the teacher replied, "Well, now I'm only drinking the tea and reading the paper." So yes, indeed, that's part of life. It's an aspect of life. Richard.
Thank you. It's mentioned both in the sutta on the sun's flesh that you gave.
Oh, right, I
example
forgot to
from.
give the metaphor. You give that metaphor, please.
Oh, well, all right. Let's see. And how, bhikkhu, should the nutriment contact be seen? Suppose there is a flayed cow. If she stands exposed to a wall, the creatures dwelling in the wall would nibble at her. If she stands exposed to a tree, the creatures dwelling in the tree would nibble at her. If she stands exposed to water, the creatures dwelling in the water would nibble at her. If she stands exposed to the open air, the creatures dwelling in the open air would nibble at her. Whatever that flayed cow stands exposed to, the creatures dwelling there would nibble at her. It is in such a way, bhikkhu, that I say the nutriment of contact should be seen. When the nutriment of contact is fully understood, the three kinds of, it says feeling here, I prefer sensation, are fully understood. When the three kinds of sensation are fully understood, I say there is nothing further that the noble disciple needs to do. Now, the key term here is fully understood. This, in this context, which leads to the noble disciple has nothing left to do. In other words, they've become an arahant. Okay, the training is finished, as the Buddha would put it. And that's because avidya has been dispelled. And so sometimes we see in certain sutras, like the Samaditi Sutra, Sariputta goes through like all the 12 stages of dependent origination and says, one can get, complete right view and attain, full enlightenment. I'm just paraphrasing, through focusing on each stage. But that's a contemplation that awakens the vidya, complete knowledge, and that vidya dispels avidya. And so Buddha always describes that it's the dispelling of avidya that dispels sankharas based on mana, the false idea that something is me or I want to be something or whatever, or the desires. And when that desire rises in the mind, cognition of that desire immediately arises, otherwise you wouldn't know that you have it. And that cognition, which leads to this life, this as a human being, because that's what he's talking about, immediately you have a vision of a certain idea of a form, and that idea of a form has a certain set of six senses. That certain set of six senses contacts the world in a certain way, which leads to the sensations. And those sensations then, the positive ones that you like, leads to your craving. The craving then leads, now it's usually described as clinging, but clinging is actually a synonym for craving. And I understood that, so I didn't understand how can the same thing be mentioned twice? But that word actually in Pāli, Bhikkhu Bodhi says organic in several of his lectures on it. Now, organic, we think of kind of like organic food or something like that, but it simply means it's organized. So it's grasping and organizing. So from that craving, you go after what you're wanting, okay? And so that grasping and organizing in terms of becoming, right, is the body, okay? So you grasp and organize the becoming of the body. And that body, when it's fully formed, it emerges from the womb as a being, and that's birth. So when it says, oh, by focusing on this part, you can become enlightened, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that specifically, it simply means that you have contemplated it sufficiently for vidya to arise, which has now dispelled avidya, which automatically Buddha describes in the sutta, dispels the next level, the next level, the next level, the next level. And I like to think of it as, did you ever see balloons? You can blow them up, they're long, and they have like round sections going along. So when you blow it up, you know, avidya, right? And then sankara, and then the next round section, you know, cognition, the next round section, name and form, etc. Right? But if you open the hole up, you know, which is where avidya is, boom, all the air comes out and all the sections deflate again, you know, and it goes back to being deflated. Anyways, it's just an example idea that I came up with. It might be helpful for people to understand. Anyways, that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. I just want to repeat something that you said, that the meaning of upadana, I had emphasized about taking up the nourishment as the same way that the fire consumes the fuel, as being part of the meaning of upadana. And Richard has mentioned the meaning of organizing the content of our experience such that it's culminating into a rebirth into a realm of existence. And so that's a second idea for upadana that gives it a very unique quality. Now I want to call on Susie. You're muted. Please come close to the microphone.
Okay.
So the voice comes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The way to deal with the nutrient contact that would lead to the defilement or bad conclusion or bad reaction or something like that, or negative reaction, is to not have it at all. It's the way to deal with it is to be devoid of it, right? Because human beings still need the contact to develop growth and mental, just for the mental development, emotional and mental development. But to be able to have enough time to go slowly, have enough time to shift from the akusala, you know, like akusala jit, which means akusala status, into neutral or not, or akusala citta, right? So once you shift it to a more positive or neutral, then your subsequent reaction is not leading to negative karma. And that's probably maybe the trick of the way that we can have sufficient time to be able to catch it in the beginning and allow the development of the resultant understanding of the flavor of it to be neutral or more positive. And that would prevent us to being in misery or actually leading to action that would be later on sorry about it, you know.
Yeah. Here, the teaching about the underlying tendencies is very useful. So the reacting to the contact, either with aversion or with greed or with delusion, is based on the corresponding unwholesome underlying tendencies. But when the underlying tendencies are free from greed, free from aversion, and free from delusion, then the contact becomes harmless, because those kinds of reactions based on those three roots is not coming up. Now, they say that, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if the underlying tendency could be, taken care of and reorganized or developed, cultivated in advance so that the unskillful reactions never came up. Yes, that would be lovely. But sometimes the unskillful reactions do come up. And I think that it might be useful even to think that when we reframe or when we step away from an unskillful reaction, we've located, like there's many different moments that are possible that we can choose among. And we can choose that part, like in a whole continuum. In our whole life continuum, there are so many possibilities that we can choose. Some of them are strongly affected by negative underlying tendencies, and some of them are more free based on wisdom, insight, and equanimity. And so at any moment, we can choose to step away from what's unskillful by finding another way of seeing it and choosing that different way. So when we choose the way to see it, which is not with those reactions, it could be, you could say that, we have the possibilities within us, which are free from the bad underlying tendencies, that are filled with the opposite tendencies, the tendency of renunciation, which is free from greed, the underlying tendency of kindness, which is free from aversion, and the underlying tendency of clear seeing, which is free from delusion. And so at any moment, it's great when the first moment, that at the very first moment, we're coming out of the space that's grounded in those skillful tendencies of renunciation, kindness, and clear seeing. But even if we started to go down our wrong track, at any moment, we have the possibility to pick up that other perspective, the perspective that's based on those skillful qualities, to step away or to step out of a negative pattern. So Susie was very nicely speaking of the kusala citta and the akusala citta as being the different perspectives and how it's relating to karma. In the next one of the nutriments, the one about sanchetana, we developed to a much bigger extent about how the nutriment of intention is feeding into our karma. Perhaps this may be enough for right now, and I appreciate everybody's patient listening. We will be coming back at 9:30 in California time, which is approximately 2 hours from now.